how can I make it fit in? And I don't mean forcing it in, but how do I stack it up with something I already do? You have to do that. The reflection or the planning, all of this has got to suit you. Otherwise, you're not going to feel like you're ever doing it right.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Labours of Sports Coaching. In today's episode, I spoke to Ray Power. Ray is the technical director of a national academy, the biggest and the national academy in South Asia, and we spoke about habits, coaching habits. It was a really great practical conversation that's building upon really extensive experience on Ray's part, and we kind of throw together some different tips that we've kind of both sort of built along the way. But Ray's really does go into some really great insights and gives some fair assessments about how coaches can do habits that are both to satisfy the requirements for the players and their athletes, but also actually help us be fair to ourselves as coaches. And I think any one of the habits that you're going to learn about in this episode is about making your job easier. Okay, not always in so far as removing the hard work that's required to get better as a coach and to perform well in the role, but to find efficiencies. And you'll hear Ray speak a little bit about efficiencies, and you'll also hear Ray speak a little bit about like net outcomes across the larger piece. What's the overall outcome that you're achieving? If it's good, not so good, that sort of thing. So I honestly love the conversation. I hope that you find it useful to just get back in touch with the practical knowledge that we need to keep in mind as coaches, and to kind of understand that. And this is a big part of this podcast. This podcast isn't about purely academic. Sometimes can lean towards quite abstract theory. We need conversations like today, like the one that I have here with Ray. Like, we need to remember professional knowledge and the stuff that you might not find in a textbook, but that you can really benefit and should go out there and try and learn. So please pay attention to some of the stuff we say. It's a conversation that could have went on for hours, and because how many habits are out there that me and Ray would be limited naturally to talking about. If you have some habits when you're listening to this conversation that you want to tell me more about, tell Ray more about, please leave a comment or on social media. If you're connected with myself or Ray, then drop a comment in there. Get in touch with us. That'd be amazing to hear, and we can just share further habits with each other. Just a quick update on some wider activity. We're now approaching March, and the next issue of the Labours of Sports Coaching, the Self-Determined Coach newsletter, will drop. In the show notes, you can find the link to subscribe to that newsletter. Again, is a bit of a whistle-stop tour on what that entails. It's looking more at the motivational science of coaching from my sort of area of experience and knowledge there, and I talk a little bit in this issue around some research that's recently been published, some updates, some own activities, a researcher in this space, and some learning that has been gleaned from prior episodes on Labours of Sports Coaching, because of course there is more to coaching than just motivation alone. Like, there's more to coaching in any one siloed issue alone. So please check it out. It's completely free. Sign up, your email, just pop it in, and it'll arrive in your inbox next month, and all other issues from there on in. And again, be sure as well to check out my website to find out a little bit more about some of the consultancy work that I do and how we might work together as well. So yeah, appreciate all the support that we have on the show. Remember to also click subscribe. Again, all the usual algorithm rubbish for why that is the case, but it is really helpful to the podcast, its reachability, its visibility to other people, to ultimately make the production better for you over time. So keeping all that in mind, I'll shut up now and we'll get into the episode. Enjoy this conversation with myself and Ray Power. So, Ray, it's good to have you. How are you?
Yeah, all good. Thanks for having me on. It's a nice change of step on the usual. Well, it's Friday here in Bangladesh, so it's good to fill the day with stuff like this.
Yeah, and with the air fan behind you, I already know that the weather's probably a lot better. So I'll try not to talk on that too much. So yeah, I'm looking forward to today actually, because we're going to have a bit of a more practical conversation around coaching habits. So for those that are listening then, Ray, because this is one of the things you proposed in our initial talk. So what was the reason for suggesting habits? Why should we care about habits and then we'll get into maybe exchanging a few of our own and see where
Yeah.
we get to.
Well, to be honest, when we spoke, and if I remember rightly, we spoke that we would do something, and then we were going to figure out what exactly it is we were going to do. And it was actually, when I proposed talking about habits, it was a response to some stuff that was going on here. So you talk about practical stuff, it was real life, because part of my role here, so I'm working in Bangladesh, in a football and sports academy here in Bangladesh. And I would say the habits that I learned in the coaching in elite or performance or academy of coaching in the UK, for example, was vastly different than the coaching habits that would be here. And that, if we were to really get into it, it could sound insulting to those here, but it was just different. So I guess I was kind of trying to figure out a problem that I see in quite well ingrained coaching habits here, that I just thought it would form a really good conversation between the two of us and for your listeners.
Yeah, could you elaborate on that then? That does sound quite interesting. Can I often wonder, is that a cultural influence, or is it just that, the goalposts are different? Could sometimes different places expect different things of coaches? Yeah. So what a coach sees as the gold standard could be different, or maybe even the way in which they want to achieve outcomes. It's not so. I think that's just the world's different. So
yeah, but look, there's probably loads of nuance and loads of different answers you could go to with this question. Like, I think back to when I started, like my first session when I went into an academy environment, like it had to be good. Like it had to be, I had to show, and this is maybe the ego part of it in coaching, and I don't think I'll be the only one, but I had to show that I was good enough to be in that environment. And I had to show the young players that I was working with that I was, enough for them. And my colleagues, I had to be able to rub shoulders with qualified colleagues who are experts in A, B, C, and D. So I kind of felt like I had to perform over and above. And I think when you go into academies now, or when you're within an academy staff, like everyone is keen to show their value and keen to show that they've got, not that it's competitive in nature, I just think it's naturally, you don't want to be left behind in an environment like that. I would suggest that here, it's like the kids that we get here, we're in a country that is, I'm trying to find the exact start point for this, but we're in a country here where sport and football, the landscape is very, very different. So there's no youth leagues, there's no academy system in every town, there's no wholesale coach development, which kind of keeps people at the sharp edge. So for example, the kids, when they come in here in their teens, they don't know any better. Like, they don't know if this is a good coaching session, a bad coaching session. They don't know if the coach should be in the thick of everything or sat down on the side on their phone. Do you know what I mean? Or having a chat somewhere else. It was, they just don't know. So maybe there's a real opportunity here. And you know what? If I'm really honest with you, if you're not careful, you find your habits changing. In that you'll go, well, do I prepare something that's exceptional, or do I just rock up and things?
That's what I was actually going to say. As you were saying that around going out there and really wanting to put on a session that isn't just about, it's not just for the players, but it's impression management for those around you and to show that you know your stuff. Like, I actually think maybe that's the first habit that I think, if we're talking about what's useful across a longer space of time, I think it's a shame in some sense that some coaches start out their careers in that way, with that hunger and that drive, but then we can very easily fall out the bad habit of feeling I've already established myself, people already know who I am, so I don't need to put much pressure onto this next session. And I wonder, and just to know what your opinion is here, because I would maybe say, should we always coach as if it's our first session? Like, in the sense of, like, you're only as good as your last session, maybe? Is that a way of keeping ourselves, at that higher standard in terms of how we prepare?
Potentially. Like, what is motivation? Like, motivation exists because it jumps up and down. And I'm not a psychologist per se, but if we've got a competition next week, I'm more motivated to go in and run that kind of session than if we don't have anything for the next month. right? That's just natural motivation for people and for coaches necessarily. So there needs to be that intrinsic motivation, and even if it is extrinsic, it is, well, we've got a duty of development to the players to bring the best version of ourselves, or should we say the worst version of ourselves is still of a quality that is fit for the environment you are in, if you understand where I'm coming from. But I can see in these type of environments, I can see why, if you're not self-aware, that it might well take hold. Because, like I say, in our environment here, competition is really, really difficult to come by. So if you can imagine, like even the top level of the game, like the Bangladesh Premier League, the champions will go into the Asian Champions League. So the top end is of a high level. There's money in the game. There's a small percentage of clubs that will be affluent, I guess. But what they have here is you have a Premier League, because of a lack of stadiums and infrastructure. If you could imagine the Premier League, that starts and finishes, then the Champions League, the championship version of that starts, and then the first division and the second division. So it's kind of like they run concurrently. It's like they run back to back rather than running concurrently. And then there's a youth tournament, and then there's something else. So what we end up with here is we have a high amount of contact time with the players, but we might only play a handful of games across a period of time, and that changes everyone's kind of, like I say, as soon as competition comes along, people come alive. Part of my role, and I won't accept, please understand, I'm not saying that you have a right to, be sloppy or lazy or unprepared or anything like that. I think that the motivation has then got to become about whatever, that duty of development, your ego, your own set of standards, wherever that comes from. It should be different and will be different for everyone.
When you're mentioning, see, be fair, like when you're mentioning there, Ray, around like having high contact time with the players, that's probably the flip side to what I'm suggesting, because actually I probably would say there's a bit of idealism in the sense of, every session's got to be like your first session, and every session's got to be tip top. But if we're going to, I think, rightfully accept that coaches are performers in their own rights, we need to also allow coaches to feel capable of having an off day at the office, or also at least capable of, because there's a amount of sessions that I come out of and I'm like, I absolutely love coaching again. That's just reinvigorated me. What a session. And then there's some sessions that come out and I'm like, no, it wasn't bad, but it was good enough. And sometimes, that maybe is the nuance. So I think there's one thing about having positive intentions and having high standards of your intent, but we can easily then fall into the space of sort of perfectionism becoming an issue if we aren't rational about the fact that there's things outside our control where people, the players in front of us, kids particularly, are very volatile as people were, but sometimes good enough is the best way of approaching to a point of reflection. But it's that funny balance, isn't it? There is a tension there.
There is. And I suppose, look, this is where habits kick in, right? In any part of life. So you can have a set of habits that will produce good outcomes, but on another day, your outcomes might be whatever. Like that's life. That's just the ebb and flow of life. And when there's, like you say, when there's things out of your control, it can affect what the outcome looks like. So look, if we're talking about sports coaching, right? It's interesting what you say. You ask coaches, and I work a lot with coaches who are academy coaches or even grassroots coaches, and you say, like, what's the best version of you? Like, what do you have to have done to have performed best in your role? And usually you get a sort of a less than a handful of the same answers. But if I was to pick the number 7, like I know what you're going to guess, it will probably be when a coaching session goes really well. And normally when a coaching session has gone really well, it's normally because coaches have prepared well for it. So there's kind of like a sweet spot there that if you prepare well, then you can perform well within all those variables. Then it's about, well, okay, maybe we have to develop sort of the first practical habit. I don't even know if it's the first one, but sort of like front and center of this habit is, well, how do you prepare your coaching sessions? Now, if you're part-time coach and I don't know, you work till 5 in the evening and you're coaching at 7 o'clock and you've got to go home and get dinner and collect the kids and whatever, dinner and all that sort of stuff. It becomes a different conversation than, you've got a couple of hours in the office with a staff where you can have a meeting about your planning and you know exactly how many players are going to turn up and you have all that. So therefore your habits will be different, right? It's as simple as that. So what I task coaches that I work with around this sort of stuff is, well, plan effectively for you. So if you are that, I don't have much time, I'm working this, I've got all the problems in the world outside of I just want to make sure my kids can play football. Well, maybe you are right, I finished my tea or my dinner, I've got my pen and paper already near the table. This is where I'll sound a little bit too fanciful, right? But the whole idea of habit stacking from James Clear kind of popularized that idea that if you want to develop a habit, then you connect it to a habit you've already got. So I'm going to come home from work, I'm going to have my dinner, and what I'm going to do as soon as put the dishes in the sink or whatever, is I'm going to spend the time I have, which could only be 5 or 10 minutes, right, in some people's world, but I'm going to use those 5 or 10 minutes, pen and paper, I'll scribble down, I'll put my warm-up, my thing, my game, all that sort of stuff, and then that's the best version of what I could come up with. And maybe then on the drive to the training ground, that will kind of morph itself into something a little bit more substantive. But you've got a chance now. Rather than saying to that coach, well, actually, you should plan. I read somewhere, someone said you should plan for equal or longer than you should deliver, right? So basically what they're saying is if you're coaching for an hour, you're coaching for an hour and a half, that you should plan for an hour or an hour and a half. Which is like lovely in a book, or that's lovely on another podcast. But in real life, for many coaches, that's just like set you up to fail straight away.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, even the point you mentioned there around plan as much as you can in the time that you've got. I mean, it's there for you're accommodating your own personal life. But I mean, I've done this myself where if I've got, and I don't think this is promoting any sort of laziness as such, but like if you know that you have an hour, and you know what, sometimes for some sessions, if you're working to different themes, like we all have certain themes, for example, like of sessions that were better catered towards, that we're able to kind of very quickly dish out. But there's other times, or maybe just because of the context of the period that you're in, or the context of the players, if you need to get 3/4 of the way there and then get in the car and figure out the rest on the way to training, you're not a bad coach for doing that. Like, or at least, I mean, what I've done in the past, where maybe it's the coaching points that I'll reflect on in the drive there, but I've got the stationary exercises that are actually there to do it. I think in the flip side as well, isn't it? You're also trying to, as part of doing that, if that helps you manage yourself emotionally or these sorts of things before you go in, and that puts you in the best place to show the best face to the players, then that, if anything, is even doubly important, because sometimes we get too bogged down, Ray, I think, in the actual content, and we forget that we need to have a planning process that allows us to show up best interpersonally. So, like, and I always think that, like, you know, coaches that are really busy or coaches that are overly flustered, we try to get everything correct. They actually, because of the pressure, and if they have a habit of getting themselves into that rut, the pressure leads itself to really short, sort of, not meaning to be unwelcoming, but we forget the relational aspect of working with small kids, or the relational aspect of just being there and being friendly. Isn't it? I think we can forget what's more important in that respect, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I work with a lot of in the process of mentoring coaches. I work with a lot of other coaches and people who are expert in their fields, and I would say that from, I don't know, working with 100 of these kind of guest experts, probably the word relationship comes up more than anything else. And like, even if you talk to people in the pro game these days, so, you know, you say, right, if you could, what's your one thing? You know, Thomas Frank, I think, has done a lot of media lately about relationships, and whether that's with the young kids that will need you to tie their shoelaces, literally, or whether it's the parents that facilitate all that happening, or whether it's in the pro game where whatever, you need to leave someone out of the team, so you have to deliver bad news, but it's better to deliver bad news on the basis of a good relationship than not. So I think there's the parts of coaching, we know that coaching is multifaceted, and, in terms of the habit part of it and being prepared, I think if you're prepared, there's less noise, there's less mental noise with yourself to detract from some of the other stuff that's important as well.
Yeah. Plus, there is definitely a point there as well around coaching is as complicated as you make it. Now, for some coaches, maybe that have been coaching a while, they should actually consider the complexities of coaching. But if you're that coach who's just started, or that coach who's trying to manage a lot of other things, there is a benefit to simplifying the process for yourself. And we're talking about relationships. And I had a previous conversation with Colin Cronin, Ray, who works at John Moores University, and Colin does a lot of work around caring and coaching. And I think one of the things that we landed on was there's more to coaching than being caring, but if you're a caring coach, you're doing most of the work. And you think about it for a coach, maybe might be listening to this, that is stressed out, does often feel inadequate. If they just focused on, being a caring person, and that takes pressure off of them and allows them to probably double down on stuff they already have experience in, whether it be from being a parent, from being a friend, from being a good person, then they can actually be really good at something and they can focus on it, and it leads to better, easier preparation, easier delivery, at least in how they think about things, probably more positive than the reflection. And that just comes from the habit of, what do I care more about?
Yeah, totally. And coaches come to me stressed quite a lot, more than you'd believe. And I think because of, it's the same thing that people talk about, like Instagram influencers and stuff like that. We look at other people and we compare ourselves to them. So that coach who's putting their fully animated session on Twitter or X or whatever, and they're putting, I did this and that, maybe I do it myself, right? Because you put your best face forward on platforms like that. Coaches come to me and they go, I don't know where people get the time to do their animated session and their PDFs and all that sort of stuff. Back of a fact pack is kind of preparation sort of stuff. I think my point for those coaches is, please be who you are and work. So if you've got a highly stressful life, or you're working a lot, or whatever your situation is, positively or negatively, how do you work the best version of you into your coaching? And if that's so, someone turns around and says, "Oh, when I get home from work and I have my dinner and all that, I still don't have the time to take out my session, or I need more than that 5 minutes." Well, then find that 20 minutes you need, I don't know, the night before, or find a way to stick that habit in there somewhere where it's not completely disruptive to what you normally do. So I think it was in James Clear in Atomic Habits, he spoke about, if you want to learn to play the guitar, they don't have the guitar in the case in the closet upstairs where you've got to, turn off the TV, go upstairs, get it out, put it down, and all that sort of stuff. You have it out, you have it there waiting. Put the remote control in the fridge for whatever, so that it's a hassle to get the TV on, but your guitar is there, so you're more likely to pick it up and just start strumming. So if we apply that to session planning, it might well be, I'll give you an example. One of my habits when I'm writing, and I'm in the process of finishing a book at the moment, when I'm writing, I always, the 30 minutes before I go to bed, I don't know if this is necessarily a good habit lifestyle-wise, but it works for me, was that I will do one last job. So it's normally a read-through. Then. So I will always square that off. So no matter what where my day takes me, and it's busy here and it's that there, or I just really get into a TV show, or I'm just too tired, I know that last 30 minutes or whatever it might be, that's kind of a habit. I need to do that. So for coaches,
and is it easier for you probably because you've done it for so long? It just becomes second nature to do, isn't it? It's like habits. It's hardest part to get into it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we throw the word habit around, but what is it other than a repetition of stuff that you've done over a long period of time? And what it gives you an accomplishment, I find, and this is just me personally, I find that gives me, it's kind of a get out of jail if I don't get what I needed to get done that day. I kind of have that, well, that half an hour is there, but it gives me the fulfillment you get that you've done something significant. I'll work to deadlines and all that sort of stuff, with the coach of the under 11 team, you might say, do you know what? I'm not like the stress of planning in the car on the way there. What does that lead to? If we're honest, that leads to you probably delivering the same session or the same bunch of sessions over and over again, because you just fall down to your, I call it your back pocket session, right? Where the thing you're familiar with, the thing you do, the thing the players already know, and you kind of feel like it gets you through it.
What is your opinion there then, actually, Ray? Because I was curious. I was going to ask you that question on your view on coaches repeating sessions, because I wonder if that goes hand in hand sometimes with a habit of planning your session, because sometimes you can plan your session and log it in a way that you have a bit of a database. Now, I've heard different things from different people. I've got my own opinion on this, but I want to know what your opinion is. And can we fall back on old sessions? Does every session need to be entirely new? Because I wonder again how we can make it easier for ourselves so that we can at least have better bandwidth to focus on all the other things. Or does it depend on the coach, the stage they're at, the group they're with, the context they're in? Maybe certain sessions do need to be more bespoke every time. What's your view on that?
Yeah, look, I've got some quite strong views, but I think quite logical ones as well. Is that the game, like football and most of the sports, is the same. You know what I mean? So it's two teams, a ball and two goals, right? And what we do when we coach is we zoom in and out of that game. So we'll zoom in on a certain technical aspect or a certain tactical thing, or we'll give every kid a ball because we want them to be more proficient with the ball for 15 or 20 minutes. So there will always need to be a consistency, because everything has got to fit that game. Everything you do has got to kind of have a relationship with that. And that sounds ridiculous to say out loud because it's so obvious, maybe we forget. What I find really, really helpful is, and this is probably something that I would suggest might be a deal breaker between, in this part of the conversation, because if I deliver the same football session, right, frequently, it's different than delivering the same defending session or the same zoom in part of the session. So I'll backtrack a little bit. I work, and I have done for probably, 10, 12 years in some shape or form. And most academy coaches will work the same around a curriculum. And I know some coaches now will go, oh my God, I definitely don't have time for a curriculum. I definitely it's a further barrier. What I find is it actually helps me with time. It helps me with all that. So instead of getting home from work and going, okay, I've got to come up with another session. I've delivered my back pocket session the last 2 weeks. I've got to give the kids something different. What do I do now? And you end up thinking and overthinking and thinking and overthinking. What I find the curriculum does, so in your phone, our curriculum this week says defending when outnumbered, right? Just plucking a topic out of the sky. Okay, all right, how do I coach defending when outnumbered? And then you go into that sort of individual process. And then you take your phone out next week and it's an in-possession thing. So it's, penetrative passing, right? And then you go, well, how do I best teach that to this group? And suddenly you're straight to the point. So you're not in the car thinking, well, I might do that, and then I might do something different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It kind of streamlines that part of your planning, and it helps you not be repetitive. Now, you might do the same defending when outnumbered session that you did last time because that went really well. And, the kids will be able to jump straight into that exercise that was a little bit complicated last time, but I was able to get out quicker this time because that repetition.
So like the change of stimulus is just through the curriculum because it gives natural diversity of thought as to around what you do. But that, I suppose, avoids you having to make decisions. You're kind of taking the control outside of yourself and letting the curriculum tell you. Which is a thing, isn't it? It's paralysis by analysis otherwise.
Exactly. So if you're on if you're on a motorway coming up to a toll bridge and there's 10 lanes or whatever, then you can spend all your time figuring out which is the best lane to get in, or, someone that you sat nav has said, get in lane 4, and you just get in lane 4 and you proceed, in that lane because you literally pick a lane. So having that, it's not out of your control, but it's helping you get straight to the point of what you're doing. And I found more than anything is when I have that, like you said, that paralysis by analysis stuff, when you have too many options, you end up kind of, and I've done it myself where I'm kind of doing that for an hour and you still arrive on the pitch and you're putting the cones out going, what am I doing here? Like I haven't picked anything. And that's when I think you get noise and you get a poorer performance from yourself because you're too busy sort of chugging through that process still.
Even kind of within a curriculum as well, isn't it? That sometimes you have each block of a curriculum maybe lasts more than just a single session. It might be a week or 2 weeks or whatever. Because what I sometimes, and I'm curious to know what your thoughts are here, because sometimes what I feel coaches, again, under this idea that we need to constantly create a new stimulus, sometimes I think it's kind of like, and this was sort of a thought I think that came through having a bit more of an understanding around like gamifying coaching a little bit. It's a bit like when you play a game and players develop, or you play an exercise, right, and players do so well in it to a point, and then the session ends, and then you go back to level one of a different exercise. I always sometimes say to coaches, if they got so far in that exercise and you know what, it was working well, you could restart that session and that session from if it's not necessarily level one of the same exercise, but start where you finished in the progression of exercise one. Go back to exercise one at the start of that session, but start on the progression. So like you're recycling the session, but you're doing it in a way that's continuing from where they left off in a good sense. So like pedagogically speaking, there are benefits from reusing sessions in certain respects, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know if you've found other ways in which you might recycle with good intent.
It makes a huge amount of sense because I don't know if there's an end to that sentence. It makes sense, right? Because they have a reference point. They have a starting spot already. Like to go back to the very start, it kind of seems a bit of a time waste. Now it's in football, it's slightly different because like when you're learning in a classroom, once you absorb a certain piece of learning, you have that forgetting curve or whatever it is. Whereas in football, it's more about practice and more about connecting mind and feet or brain and feet or whatever. I've found this, something we use actually here is what we call a training map. It's something I've been working really quite hard on probably the last 12 or 18 months. Training map or training diet, depending on how I'm trying to explain it. So it's, if you think of football training as something between unopposed, so all 20 or all 16 players they have a ball each, right? So that's one player, one ball. And the biggest you'll probably get to is 11v11, right? And then, I don't know, you're in that environment where you have, 30 kids show up for some reason because it's, a big group or it's a community setting or it's something. Two merged teams have to train together one night. You might end up doing this kind of, let's say there's 24 kids show up. So you go 8v8 and then 8 on the outside or whatever. But there's a top and a bottom to football coaching. So you have a selection of high ball ratio stuff. So one player, one ball, one player to maybe one ball to 4 or 5, 4 versus 4, 5 versus 5. And then you have the other end. So you have technical stuff and tactical stuff. And then you also have what I would call sort of like alternative variations of that. So I'll explain a little bit slower. So if I've got 12 players, I'll give you a real example actually. A couple of days ago, I had to go into my back pocket because out of a circumstance, there was 24 of our senior male players available to train. Some of the staff were here. It was one of them random days. We're here, there and everywhere. There was some injuries. There was some stuff going on in school. So there was 24 boys there. There was no goalkeepers. And I wasn't expecting to coach that group. So I'm rocking up to the pitch. The equipment's there. The players are there. So I've got to come up with a worthwhile session. We've got a curriculum topic, so I know where I can go with this. So what I do with a training map is you go, right, I want to hit, and these are older teenagers, so I want to hit high ball ratio, and we'll work that towards, lots of technical stuff, so lots of ball contacts, and we'll work the way through small-sided, medium-sided, large-sided, and then something alternative. And that alternative would be outnumbered or neutral players or stuff like that. So the 24 players, it ended up being I call it a ball mastery, I suppose, but a highly technical 1 ball, 2-player exercise. Then we moved it to 6v6. 2 6v6s happened at the same time. The 2 6v6s became 7v5, then 8v4. And then we finished 8 versus 8 versus 8. Right. So we hit what I would say are the 4 or 5 zones to do that. And that was in one session. To your point, where you started on this was, if I do this today, should I start with that again tomorrow? We use that training map to say, instead of one session, be like across a week, you need to hit these zones. So it's tempting here to spend a lot of time in that 11v11, that 1 ball to 22 players environment. And if we found that we've been stuck in that for a couple of days, out of circumstance this week, it happened. So we ended up, that's why I started the session with a really low one and spent a lot more time in that environment. So
is that thinking then about how you can maybe repurpose a single exercise by maybe tweaking other constraints around the size, dimension? I mean, even if you consider, and this might just be a wee bit of a shortcut for coaches, any attacking exercise you do by nature has a defensive element to it that you could flip. That, there's no such thing as a 1v1 only from an attacking standpoint, and then it's a funny one. See, going back to that before we maybe move on from the sort of not move on from this specific element of the planning process you mentioned around the back pocket and stuff like that. Does that feed into, so I'm curious to know, so that you can refer back to things easily, even when maybe the session was done maybe a month or two ago, whatever, is there any specific bits of information, like how much information do you note down as a coach when you're planning for that future reference? I know at the time, and certainly as you become more experienced, you don't need as much detail in it in your blueprint and delivery, because there's sort of become cues over time, don't they, really? But for the purpose of having a backlog, is there maybe a minimal information that you would maybe set to have so that you don't have to go all the way back into the back reaches of your mind again some point down the line?
One of the things we could do is we could be dead flexible and go, well, actually, it doesn't really matter what I remember about it or where it went for me, because that's only going to be my kind of opinion and judgment of it. So if we're going to run that again, let's run it again. If they get to, let's gamify it, as you said, if they get to level 2 or level 1, they're just kind of flicking through, then we go to level 2 then. We don't have to spend the same amount of time or energy in those spots. And it's always interesting, when you do, Doug Lemoff has a word for it. I can't off the top of my head remember what he calls kind of referring back to previous learning. There is a word for them. It's just skipped my mind. But that idea is actually really quite strong. And then finding what that prior learning has left, but with the players, not necessarily with you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It makes a lot of sense. And if football is that 2 teams, 2 goals, 1 ball, then and people play it day in, day out with those environment, we don't have to. I don't think we need to worry too much about the repetitive side if that's the kind of thing we're repeating. Now, if we're just repeating the same drill because that's just what we do, and by drill I mean the old, cones in a line and you do A before you do B before you do C, like that drill stuff, I'd be massively against, especially if it's going to just be repeated over time, because it's just a constant little thing.
Does that feed Ray into kind of what you were saying around being able to do by game-based practice, you're able to sort of, it's dynamic activity regardless of past reference or this and that. So it's it's a good habit to get into purely because it's far more likelihood of landing just because it's playing the game again, and it's totally. And it's knowing what they know, and it's not overcomplicating matters a little bit, isn't it? That?
I asked a group of coaches that I work with, there was about 10 or 12 of them, a really open question. I said, what can't you coach in a game? And they there was that long pause, and the closest I think someone got, like if you talk about small sided games, probably the closest technical thing that you can't coach might be heading, right? And that's kind of frowned upon these days anyway. So, because it's small, you don't have area balls, you don't have that natural thing. Anything else, whether it's attacking, defending, transitioning, whether it is a technical thing, will come up during that game. Now, if you feel like you need to manipulate the game, so that what you want to coach does come up. So if I want to coach defending when outnumbered, then, okay, let's put 2 neutral players in there so that when the opposition has the ball, you are always outnumbered. And then when you have the ball, the opposition is always outnumbered. So I can get my teeth into that particular topic. If you want to, and coaches do this all the time, we just don't really call it anything. If you want to see more passing, then you say, okay, you need to play 6 passes before you score a goal, or, your goal will count 6 points if you have 6 passes, or whatever it might be. And coaches have been very good at that. But what we've also been good at, maybe to the detriment, is that we just completely rip it out. What we want to coach, we rip it out of the game, just so it's too far removed from the game.
Because there is a spectrum there, isn't it? I think it is. On one side of it, the game in its most naked form, like, just that isn't always the best teacher, because particularly if you're wanting specific practice or some sort of deliberateness to what you're doing, because sometimes things will happen coincidentally in a game that's just not compartmentalised at all. But equally, the more you compartmentalise for focus, the more you run the risk of it becoming like a drill or becoming too decontextualised. Now, I mean, I must say, enough, it's a wee bit of a difference of opinion. I think personally you can get good drills, but there's a lot more onus on the expertise of the coach to ensure that the drill remains functional. It just depends on the words that we attach to things. It's still a drill at that point. It really depends. But that is always the risk, isn't it? You're running, and I suppose you're trying to get it is maybe the habit about make it as compartmentalised as it needs to be, but no more than that. Is it kind of just trying to no more than it needs to be? Maybe that's the sort of the sweet spot there.
Absolutely. And if you're gonna do it, like, you can have some justification for it. So we have a square that, I don't know, 20 by 20 square. Every kid has a ball. And this looks nothing like the game of football, but I want to make sure that they have 1,000 touches in the next 10, 15 minutes, whatever that might be, right? That kind of idea that we're just going to zoom in right in on mastery of the ball, like being comfortable with the ball. And I'm going to tell them to turn like this, and I'm going to tell them to use the left foot only, or whatever it might be. Like, can you justify why you're doing it and how it will fit back into the game? So I think it's pretty well acceptable that the more time kids spend with the ball, sort of pre-puberty, the kind of better the technical actions tend to be as they go through the game. Now, you still got to factor in the game's reference points and all that sort of stuff, and it's better to do that sort of exercise with some traffic and interference from other players, rather than through 5 or 6 cones where you're slaloming through arbitrary objects that just don't move. There's some outcomes like that, of course, but where you can, like, start with the game. So one thing that I do, and I don't hear it very often. In fact, I don't hear it at all, other than kind of reverberating around my own head, is that if I'm planning a football session around whatever topic it is, and maybe this is a habit thing, because people create habits to make themselves efficient. You said lazy earlier on, but that idea of being efficient, like, I just need to get this done well, correctly, as quick as possible. So if I'm planning a session on X topic, it will be, well, how do I best, with the group in mind, how do I best coach that? Right? So let's say it's, I don't know, something we've not mentioned already, like counter-pressing in football, right? So the idea that you lose the ball and you try to regain it within a small time frame. So how do I best coach that? And it might be, I have 4 parts to my session. A technical warm-up, I have some sort of possession game, I have the next game, and then I have the biggest version game I can play. Maybe it's section number 3, where I can teach that the best. So I will plan that first, because that's got to be the most important, like, theoretically, absolutely, to be the most important thing. For something else, it might be, well, I'm going to use that in the biggest form of game I can have on a Tuesday night is a 7v7, right? And I've only got one goalkeeper, so I've got to do something different up the other end of the pitch. But that's how I'm going to coach wide play, right? Whatever it is. Or I need to coach up the playing up back through what we call in football, that kind of the forward pass that disturbs the back line. It's like, right, I'm going to coach that in the first part, in the technical part, because the group won't know what that is and they won't really have a visual on it. And then we'll move my planning forward or backwards depending on where I go.
Yeah, that seems like quite a cool way, but Ray, sorry, just not interrupt your momentum there. Just as you say that I find it's really useful, because if we're constantly just thinking that every exercise has to keep building upon the one before, you're never really reaching any one central part of the training session, and also like you're not giving yourself enough hints as to what you could do to fill either side of that. Because if you, like, I'm thinking in contrast, if I then go, right, this is maybe I can't think of 5 or 6 exercises, but I can think of the best one. And what's the one that I would love to see, right? And I get that down and I see all the points. And now from there, I can go, right, what could build to that? What could maybe round off after that? And then you've got your I think that's the hard part, isn't it? And certainly when you start coaching, even when you keep on coaching, you're always trying to find your anchor point, I suppose, in some sense. But sometimes the sort of every exercise, even if we know that we're trying to progress, but sometimes having the same expectations of every exercise has to be the gold standard. It's not conducive as a habit to more efficient planning, and it probably gets you in a bit of a rut.
Absolutely. And look, let's say that third part of the session is the gold standard part of what that session will be, like that's going to be the main body of teaching and learning. Like, I can be sure that I dedicate enough time or enough energy into that part. So if that means the second part's a little bit shorter, or the last part is a little bit longer, maybe, at least I can go into that and go, right, the substantial body of my coaching is going to be in here. So therefore, if it's going to be substantial, I may as well put the best time into that. Because it's like, whether it's writing a book, whether it's about putting a CV together, like you will probably, when you're doing your coaching session, you'll probably put more energy into the first part than the last part. Because if you walk away from it and you come back, you start again. So, your warm-up ends up being, or the technical part of your session ends up being, well, I'll do that, and then the progression can be that, and that player will move there, and then the next progression will be that, and you kind of have this thing, and then you get to the end and go, and then we'll play a game, and then it's finished.
Because you fizzle out, maybe that's the point where you need to get in the car, and you need to move, so you're getting incrementally worse as the session goes on.
Absolutely.
Is that maybe where, because I know obviously we're trying to be fair to coaches about how we can plan quicker and be more efficient. To play devil's advocate, however, because you'd mentioned about being able to look in your back pocket and this and that, is there not also a bit of there's pain that we can put ourselves through as a habit? But I think one of the things where I think elaboration and plan on paper can be good is it's not always useful at the time. It's not always enjoyable at the time. But for the capability of then 5 months' time, 5 weeks' time, the more information you can put in now, it can create for an easier recycling process. If that matters to you, to look back on it, because what I say is, like, see, I've been in environments where I've had to upload sessions to databases, and we infograph and it can be really annoying. Obviously, we're starting to focus on individuals. Oftentimes, the reason for the databases is for sharing across people. But sometimes doing the heavy stuff today can make your tomorrow lighter. Make next month lighter. So it's like sometimes there is a bit of a purpose as well to having a bit of a headache if it's maybe on a Sunday afternoon, because it's not to say the next Sunday afternoon's also occupied. You might be doing yourself a favour by having a bit more of an elaborate planning process for the times when you need it to be shorter.
I know what you mean. So
I don't know.
Basically what you're talking about is that you're going to have a net gain over time. And then it'll be worth it. And we do this all the time and not consider it. Like, we go to work because at the end of the month, at the end of the year, we have to pay for the house and the car and all that sort of stuff. So your habits are affected. You used the word lazy earlier. I wanted to sort of stay away from that and start talking about being efficient. Like, our habits have us being efficient. Humans, by their nature, are efficient people, and sometimes that will be take the shortest drive or the shortest whatever, the shortest point from A to B. But do you know what, if I'm listening to this pod, right, and I don't know, if there's 20 minutes left in the pod and I'm 2 minutes from home, if the pod really matters to me, I'll drive the long way home, or I'll drive around you know what I mean? It becomes a different set of habits because you have something in there that's more important. So the easy thing for me to do would be to just kind of figure it out and when I get there and all that sort of stuff. But it makes it harder when you're delivering because, I don't know, the kids are looking at you going, well, is that the same exercise you're doing again? Or, okay, we'll do it. You know what I mean? And the hour, I personally find a good coaching session, it flies. Like time flies when you're having fun, that whole idea. But a poorly planned one or something that you're kind of not part of, or you just kind of struggling through it, drags, and you're looking at your watch and you're like, you know, I've made earlier easy on me rather than just putting in a little bit of time that will make this so much better for everyone. And it's all about what your net gain will be.
Yeah, and could we I'd like to maybe transition into, not even transitioning, but deepen this topic of optics and how the players will see you, because one of the other habits, you made a post recently, and I've spoken a lot about this in the past myself, where like the layout of your session, like cones, and is there anything in that we might want to chat about, Ray? Because I think there's some things that people can overlook there, and it's a very easy win.
Yeah,
and
totally.
Can we chat about that?
Yeah, definitely. And this is, let's see, I'm going back quite a number of years. I used to have a back pocket session that involved, like I could do it in a large bedroom. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't relying on space. It wasn't relying on how many kids were there. It wasn't relying on loads of equipment. And it basically went from using the same space. I would only need to pick up a handful of cones, like 20-second transition from exercise 1 to exercise 2. So, okay, let's backtrack a little bit. If I'm planning a session on whatever it might be, if I've got 4 or 5 different exercises that are wildly different in setup and space and all that sort of stuff, then actually I'm going to set up and transition between things potentially 5 times, you know, which is not optimal for anything. If you have and it's really hard to kind of explain this exactly without a visual, but if you have a warm-up space or a technical exercise space that I'll add a couple of more cones, or the orange cones now mean, so the blue cones are for the warm-up. If we add the orange cones in, those are your scoring zones, and then you pick up the blue cones and then the pitch becomes a 7v7 pitch or whatever it is. So it just slickens what you're doing, rather than having piles of, you know, Heathrow Airport syndrome where you've got piles of cones everywhere and, you know, it looks like the 215 from New York is going to land on your pitch any second, because there's just so much going on.
And there are cones as well. Like there's wee hats, I suppose, as well. Like flat markers can be great if you're not trying to disrupt, because it's like you said, they're trying to get the balance correct between allowing you to transition out and having lots of different things in your session. But you have to also make sure that any one exercise, it's clear what the boundaries of that exercise are, and it's not, oh, that's not it. So like small things like that, like use flat markers or use one side, color-coded stuff that allows for, you know, and for coaches maybe listening, at poolside, there could be a similar thing. It's just that it's trying to think how you can make that transition between exercises easier. If you're working with a coach, that's a different thing. And if they have a habit of working with a coach, then maybe they allow a bit of filler space time, you know, maybe they're doing a reactivation game with kids or whatever. Is there something around how it sells the session as well to players? Like, could sometimes, again, with the intent of efficiency, we sometimes can, like, I hear sometimes principles around have a minimalistic setup. Now, I get that. I think that's good in some respect for a coach, because it creates for easier. That's fine. Don't need to have more than what you need. But I always think what makes for an exciting environment sometimes, again, requires energy on the coach's part, because it's like, if you go out and if you want to, go to a supermarket, or you go to a store, how the store presents itself is a marketing tool. And I think if coaches consider how we present our sessions, it's a marketing tool for those that walk into that session. Absolutely. And again, I wonder, there is again a tension there, isn't it? You can have too little stuff, and you can also have too much stuff. I hate outlet stores.
Yeah,
you know, it's a catastrophe. Yeah. But they need, you know, they want excitement, don't they, as well? And what's your experience been around that? Around how would you instruct coaches to get habits of making busy sessions, or making sessions that are still, you know, where would you be on that spectrum?
Well, I think it probably fits in to our entire conversation. I kind of have 2 points here on this, and I don't want to get down a rabbit hole of one and forget the other. Variety a variety is a good diet, right? We used the word diet earlier on. So if you have variety in that, so if that variety happens to be in how you set up, so I want to coach, okay, there's a possession game I do where there's obviously boundaries, but you score goals through gates. So there's small gates located randomly all over the inside. So when someone rocks up, they go, okay, that looks really busy. That looks really quite complicated. But you get into it and it's actually really simple. But the next day or the next session or whatever, the possession game that you're doing might only be 4 cones to represent the 4 sides and the corners. So I don't have a problem at all if coaches want to go in and they want to go, this is the best way for me to coach this. And it's going to be dead busy, but does it make sense? So if I have 10 gates in the middle of this playing area, then each gate, so each pair of cones at least has to be the same color. You know what I mean? Because if they're different colors, then it starts to look mental and starts to play with the pictures in your head. So I think coaches could, a little bit like that outlet store versus kind of a store where you go, I can go to that aisle and I can go to, they do it quite a lot here so Bangladesh, is famous for garments and producing clothes and stuff like that. So they'll have lots of little football shops. And there's no kind of system necessarily to like the sizes or the club or the sport or anything like that. It tends to all be clumped together somehow. And they sell, I'm certain they sell less because of it, because I don't want to trudge through everything. I want to go straight to my size and my sport and my favorite team or whatever it might be to see if I can have it. That makes most sense. So if I'm a player at a football session, I walk up, I want to at least know that I have a feel for what can happen, or it will only take the coach a few seconds, and I mean seconds, to go, okay, the white cones are your playing area. It's red versus blue. The coloured gates you see, to score a goal, you've got to pass through one of those gates and you get a point. Everyone understand? Yeah, let's try it for a minute. You got it. Those 2 gates are too close together or the colours are too similar. It's causing some confusion, so I'll put them over there. Play. And that's you done, even with your kind of runway kind of looking set.
Yeah. So you never want to jeopardize the simplicity of how they can actually interact with that environment, because that is true. Like, I always think a challenge for coaches should be, really, you can get your exercise started in 30 seconds. If you can't get the exercise started in 30 seconds, either is it too complicated, or should you be more succinct in what you're saying? Because, and I remember that was a challenge I had. I remember when a coach told me to do that, I was like, oh, but it takes a minute, and it doesn't. It's like, if you think about your planning, it really should be so obvious to the players how to do it. And you know what? Like, a habit, this is maybe something as well within that. Players ask questions, young kids, and that's great. 1 question's good. 2 questions, okay.
Yeah.
If there's a 3rd question, just get the ball rolling and get them to figure it out as they go. And, I think that is another thing, isn't it? It's about how do we, because there's one thing about starting tempo, maintaining tempo. How do we get the exercise started? Sometimes we can get held up too much. And if we haven't got principles or rules in place for ourselves at how we manage that situation, if that's not a habit of ours, I think it can lead to very up and down sessions from one session to the next, insofar as the level of activity probably as well. Absolutely. Is there anything you've done in how if we could, I know we're coming towards the end of the conversation, Ray, but in the management of your delivery now, is there anything you would maybe speak to there?
Like, I suppose I was a bit off the cuff when I said bin it. If it takes too long or it's too complicated, bin it. Like, maybe this is a habit from writing as well. I find that if I'm chugging through a section or a piece that I'm trying to explain and I don't feel like it's kind of grabbing me off the page and I'm struggling to finish a sentence and all that, it's like, just start again. Just rip it up and find a new way to tell this story or say this part. And I find that with coaching sessions. So I'm a big believer in, like, explain it quickly and succinctly. I work in a second language as well, in terms of, that, and I have done in quite a lot of environments. So you have to be really, really concise in how you're explaining things. If we go back, and let's look at another strategy, if we go back to that gates possession game that we spoke about, let's say there's 4 different coloured gates in that playing area. we could have a game where each of those coloured gates gives you a difference. So the reds are worth 1 point. The blues, to score in the blues, you have to dribble through it. To score in the greens, it's going to be 2 points, and whatever it might be, the yellows or something else. So if I explain that to you all at the beginning, like everyone's going to be, oh my God, what does that one mean? And what's that one again? And what's that? No, that was 2 points. That was 1 point. You dribbled through the wrong colour. Like people's heads are going to fall off. If you go the first minute or 2 minutes, pass through the gates to score, stop, okay, pass through the gate, you'll get your point, but if you dribble through the blue ones, I'll give you a double point. And then you let them play, and that kind of embeds, and then you go, right, if you go through I can't remember what I said now, the green ones, that does this. So you kind of scaffolding it, right? You making the information really chunked, that by the end, and by the time you're into your body, so there's some reason that you're putting those ideas in, by the time you're in the flow of it, anyone who rocks up is way behind. Like they're looking at this going, oh my God, like how is this working? But it works because you just give it in bite-sized information.
So is that like there's a contingency there for latecomers, but also it gives you your progression. So it actually makes it easier for you as a coach. So you're not needing to start on A, B, C, D, unless, again, there's a separate conversation if they've done some stuff in a previous session, whatever. But like just isolating it for now, you've given yourself room to grow and have your coaching points now for the progression. So it's like, it's good. It's a win-win. And then the players can keep up with it. They can move with it, you know.
But that's the most important thing. Like you ended there saying that, and the players can, like that's the most important part. Like if the players, I spoke about this on another pod recently. I specifically remember being in a pre-match drill passing practice as an adult, as a UEFA B coach, I think it was probably at the time. So I'd been around the environment, and I could not get this passing drill that the manager was putting us in. I just, the whole pass to A, run to B, all that sort of stuff. I just couldn't get it. And that was me, like grown man in this environment day in, day out. So it turned me off that idea. So the most important things is that the players, kids or adults inside it, are actually getting to the point they need to get as slickly as you possibly can.
Yeah, I'm glad you said, I'm the exact same way. Like there is sometimes I watch sessions and I'm like, I don't have a clue what's going on here. And we're meant to be the ones that are like, and I'm not even saying, I'm not even saying like bad, I'm saying good exercises, but I actually find it hard to follow stuff. So like you can imagine for players that are in front of you, you should always be doubly keen to make it as simple as possible, particularly because and this is actually, it's both a habit, but I think it's also both a protection for their confidence, because I'm used to, as a player, getting nervous about ensuring I understand exercises. I'm not even thinking about performing the sport. I'm thinking about understanding exercise. So that just shows the level of insecurity that players have. So like it's both making it easier for you, but it's actually a form of looking after players. Totally. It's just everything's judgment, which is a worried all the time.
Genuinely, Mark, I felt like an idiot that day. I felt like an idiot, genuinely, and it sounds really over dramatic or whatever, but I get to the front of the queue, which I hate as well, by the way, and I'm just like, I'm just going to go back to the back because I don't know what I'm doing here, and I'll just watch and I'll just survive the next few minutes until we move on. And clearly that's not optimal for anything.
No.
And if ultimately, if the players involved in it, if they're struggling, the ego environment that football is, it probably means the coach is going to start getting antsy with the players, and the coach will start blaming the players for not understanding, and you're not listening, and we did this last week and you weren't listening then either. And I remember watching a coach, highly experienced, highly qualified, the session was to start with a passing practice. So the passing practice was in their shape. So there was a point where the centre-back had to open up and play like a diagonal pass to a full-back. And it kind of kept breaking down off that centre-back. And it turned into, I think we went over the allotted time, never mind the allotted time for that practice. We went over like the hour and a half, still on this practice. And the kid was getting slaughtered, and we would change that player because he can't do it. And then the next player going, okay, can I do it? And he was trying to play this diagonal pass. It was just inappropriate. It's one of them situations where you go, do you know what? My net gain here is to move on. It's to go, right, do you know what? I'm going to move on to the next bit, because or we'll go back to the bit before without the diagonal pass.
So they're not coaching for the drill, they're coaching for the sport. It's a different thing, isn't it? It's like the exercise shouldn't be the end point. And it's like that. So I'm curious, just in time that we've got remaining, what are habits after coaching, whether that be in the session or whether that be after a match? Is there any habits you have, maybe more think about reflection or habits that you felt? I just wonder about that, you've been such an experienced coach. What's been helpful? Is there been any habits that you think have informed that element of the process?
I'm not sure I know of any. Outside, the only coaches that I'm aware of that formally reflect on their session, like pen and paper, do it again, whatever, the review part, are coaches with professional teams where they finish the session and have a staff meeting to debrief how you think Johnny did, or how you think, who should we play A or B on Saturday and all that. And it's kind of a performance reflective. I don't know, and maybe some of your listeners will say I'm completely wrong on this, but I don't know of anyone who reviews the way they tell you on coaching courses to do. And I know I certainly don't. I would say I have some sort of reflective log in mentally that something like that works, or I tried to coach counter-pressing in the best way that I can coach counter-pressing, but it didn't quite work. Why? And just get straight to the point. So instead of this kind of real generalized, what went well, what didn't go so well, all that sort of stuff, that just becomes like, I'm pretty certain no one has, or very few people will have a habit of that, because it's just a bit too repetitive. What went well, that's fine. We're getting to the point of that went well, I'll do it again, or that part just didn't work. So I did that session I was talking about earlier, when it went to 8 versus 4. You remember I was saying the 24 players and we went 6v6. When it got to 8 versus 4, the 8 players would score with 8 passes. The 4 players would score with 4 passes, right? Just a little bit of a quirky little thing, I thought. The 4 never got to 4 because they were too severely outnumbered. The space was too small, a load of different reasons. If I made the space bigger, then the 4 would struggle to get the ball at all. So, it kind of ends up, well, when I do kind of circle back to doing an exercise like that, what do I do? Do I make it 8 versus 4? So you have to get 9, you have to get 3. Do you know what I mean? What's the way I could tweak that? But I think if it means something to you, you kind of carry those lessons around, So
it's trying to still individually. It's interesting you say that, right? So, well, actually, there's 2 points here I want to touch on. What I quite like, Ray, is when you mentioned things around like the net return. Because I think that's one thing, isn't it? Because sometimes, again, and I think this is about coaches being fair on themselves and treating themselves as performers who have, like, just the same way players have. They have good spells in a game, they have bad spells. But what's the net outcome of the session? Because maybe, sometimes and this is the hard part, sometimes we reflect on our session based on the last exercise we've done or the worst exercise of 3 or 4 great exercises. It's like, I wish sometimes coaches, and it's something that I think I get better at doing, and it helped me, and it kind of brings on to, I wanted to respond to your initial thing, because it's interesting, the different perspectives, but just recognising you've done some good stuff. You've probably done more good in a session than you didn't. So like that in itself is really important to keep aware of, particularly to avoid that sort of perfectionism maybe impacting our confidence. The other thing you said, and I actually completely agree, I think across a long term, really formalised reflection isn't always, it's not always sustainable. But and this is just my own experience, I did have a period, and this was when, this was more when I transitioned from community sport into sort of academy sport. And it was actually because I struggled with the going up a level, or at least I struggled with being in an environment that was far more high quality than what I'd been used to. And there was a period where my confidence wasn't great. And what I found was helping with that was I journaled, where basically after each session, I went home and I would actually say what went well. But I'd done it because I had to ensure that I had 3 good points for any 2 bad points. And it was actually partly because I needed that psychologically. So I needed to ensure there was a ratio of good to bad. So like for people, they would listen, I think, but I went away from that eventually, when eventually I felt, I was comfortable in my own strength. I was like, so I used it for a spot of my development. It wasn't a longer term thing. Now it is a bit more organic. Now it is, but that's been built on my own psychology a little bit.
You did it because it was important to you at a time, and when it's not important to you, you stop doing it. You know what I mean? It's in front and center, and that's habits. Because we have certain habits that we have to do, whether that's, I don't know, going to the toilet in the morning or whatever people refer to all the time, or eating, or certain bad habits are there because we're compelled to do them. But otherwise, like, I'm not sure if you're a volunteer coach in a community environment where it's probably costing you money to coach and it's costing you time and stuff like that, like, there will be a greater importance to why you're doing it to trade it off against that. And just like you said there, when it's important to you, you do it, you will journal and all that. If it's not, you just won't. That's what habits are. So making them realistic and giving yourself a break as well is important. For sure.
But certainly, I think the main thing there as well around reflection as a habit is do something. Even if it's a short thing, I think, with reflection, even if it's a long, whatever, but actually reflect. I mean, I always go back to this quote. There was a Galton Trudeau, there was a paper that's always stuck with me around 10 years of coaching without reflection is 1 year of coaching repeated 10 times. And I always think that because, like, if you're not active in reflection, then it's not the sexiest thing in the world to find reflect. It's just, it's not entertaining, it's not exciting, but it's, by God, the fastest way to get better. Like, actively reflecting and just turning it over and making a habit of doing something, I always think is really important, because it's just forgotten about. It's assumed to just happen unconsciously, and it's just, it's interesting to
it's taking a slow circle, because ultimately your habits got to fit into how you work and all that. So you might review a journal, I might review in the car on the way home, or you know what I mean, or sometimes you reflect for longer because it went bad, or sometimes like if I'm the coaches I work with, I will tend to get sporadic messages like 20 minutes after I finish coaching, it was horrendous, or this game was brilliant, and all that. So it's got to fit in with you, but you've got to help it fit in, which is, I would suggest, habits in a nutshell.
No, honestly, it's fantastic. Could I challenge it? And the thing is, it's a shame in a way that there's only so much time we have to be. This is a topic you could talk about endlessly, isn't it? There could be a part 2 and a part 3 to this. And hopefully the people that are listening are probably thinking of their own habits as well that are coming out, and ones maybe we haven't got to. Could I challenge you to think? I like to kind of round off the session sometimes with like 2 or 3 coaching hats. And could I maybe challenge you to think, could you summarise some of what we've mentioned so far, not in the specific elements of it, but just around what are your 2 or 3 takeaway points that you would maybe suggest to coaches around habits that really, I think, kind of get at the importance of considering this topic as a whole? If we could maybe chat. Apologies, that's a bit of a, it's sometimes
and I'm not the greatest fan of listing stuff, because there's always something you miss off. So, but like the first things that I thought of when we kind of agreed to kind of talk about habits in coaching was, the place I went straight to was like, how does planning fit into my life? How can I make it fit in? And I don't mean forcing it in, but how do I stack it up with something I already do? You have to do that. Like we said about the reflecting part, the reflection or the planning, all of this has got to suit you. Otherwise, you're not going to feel like you're ever doing it right. So if I decide tonight that I'm unhealthy and I'm going to set my alarm at 5 a.m. because I'm going to go for that hour-long run tomorrow morning, and it's going to be great, and I'm going to have Eye of the Tiger on in my... If that doesn't happen, which it probably won't, because I've never done it in my life before, then I'm going to turn the alarm off, I'm going to fall back to sleep, and I'm going to feel rubbish about it, right? So it's not if it's too far removed from how you are. Like you read all the business books, like the 5 a.m. Club, and such and such a CEO is up at 4:30 in the morning. Like, not everyone's built for that. And I would love coaches in my world to understand that fit the best version of you around you. And, we can do it in a real efficient way or a real lazy way and go, well, I've only got 5 minutes to plan, so I'll only use 5 minutes and it'll just be whatever, like a get out of jail. A genuine, like, this is the best version of me because I'm going to do my planning at this time in this way, because that, to go right back to the start, that's what makes me feel like I'm a success when I coach. Well, that's my favourite part of, the best part of me being as a coach. So yeah, I think that's the core of it.
Yeah, no, love it. Honestly, it's been fantastic just getting your insights and having someone who's been coaching for as long as you have, and across so many different continents as well included in that race. So just honestly, I can't thank you enough. Thanks so much for coming on. For those that are listening, guys, I hope you found that even a 10th as interesting and as informative as I have. We'll see you next time. Thanks again, Ray.
Yeah, pleasure. Real good. Thank you.